On November 1st, 1983, then President Ronald Reagan wrote in his diary, "Dear Diary, day began with GOP congressional leadership, a full cabinet room. Last night, the Republican Senate very irresponsibly refused to pass an increase in the debt ceiling, which is necessary if we are to borrow and keep the government running. After we gave them all a rundown on Lebanon and Grenada, we took up the budget and the necessary legislation. I sounded off and told them I'd veto every darn thing they sent down unless they gave us a clean debt ceiling bill. That ended the meeting." Okay, first of all, Ronald Reagan would swear when he wrote in his diary, but he would not write out the full swear word so as not to scandalize his diary. So when I said that he said every darn thing, what was actually in the diary, what Ronald Reagan actually wrote in the diary was D-N. Every D-N thing. He said he'd veto every darn thing the Republicans sent to him unless they gave him a clean debt ceiling vote. Or maybe it was something even worse than every darn thing. We will never know because that's how he wrote it in his diary. While Ronald Reagan was president, the nation raised the debt ceiling 18 separate times. 18 times. This week, House Democrats circulated a radio address from Ronald Reagan from 1987, from one of those times that they were raising the debt ceiling. They circulated this Reagan radio address to try to encourage today's Republicans that even if they can't believe the Trilateral Commission, Bilderberg Group, Democratic Party, all caps, crazy font, communists who are saying it today, perhaps they could believe the Saint Ronald Reagan when he explained how important it is to raise the debt ceiling.
Congress consistently brings the government to the edge of default before facing its responsibility. This brinkmanship threatens the holders of government bonds and those who rely on Social Security and veteran benefits. Interest rates would skyrocket, instability would occur in financial markets, and the federal deficit would soar. The United States has a special responsibility to itself and the world to meet its obligations.
Yes, but of course, Ronald Reagan was a noted communist long-haired hippie. It is important to recognize that this is the state of debate right now in half of Washington. In half of Washington, the Democrats are using Ronald Reagan from the 80s and everything else they can think of to try to convince Republicans that defaulting on the national debt would be bad. Think about that for a second. On the House side, the conversation could not be more basic. It's like, economy blow up? Bad thing. America's sad if economy blow up. Economy blow up? No. I mean, while that is the level of discussion in one half of Washington, would you like to explode the economy? Think twice. That's where we're at with one half of Washington. But the other half of Washington is sort of pretending that that's not really happening at all in the House. The other half of Washington had the president today going before the White House press corps to praise a complicated, very conservative plan agreed to by a bipartisan small group of senators with 3-part spending cuts to 1-part revenue increases. That is a big corporate tax cut and tax cuts for the rich, but closing some loopholes and controlling some costs and so on. The president and the gang of 6 senators and apparently a lot of other senators besides were very excited today on their half of Washington. Very excited today in their half about their very conservative, very bipartisan deficit reduction plan that they think they can all sign on to as a path toward raising the debt ceiling. And I'm sure that was a very edifying discussion about their bipartisan, conservative, go along to get along big Senate plan, which the president likes. But it is not the president and the Senate who need to get together to decide this thing. It's the president and the Senate and the drunk kids at the other end of the building who are setting their Barbies on fire and cooking metal in the microwave until it explodes. Watch it burn. Watch it burn. Honestly, it is time for a reality check here. House Republicans are not trying to drive a hard bargain and get the best Republican deal possible in exchange for raising the debt ceiling. House Republicans do not want to raise the debt ceiling for anything. They would please not like to raise the debt ceiling. They would like to go into default. Thank you very much. House Republicans have been actively making that argument for weeks now, that hitting the debt ceiling, that won't hurt a bit. Who cares? Republican Congressman Mo Brooks of Alabama actually told the Washington Post this week that on the contrary, quote, our credit rating should be improved by not raising the debt ceiling. which is a little like saying you're looking forward to how that sledgehammer is going to improve your dental work. Another Republican Congressman, Rick Crawford of Arkansas, says after a catastrophic default and financial crisis, the government can just move some money around to fix things for a while. Quote, that wouldn't work for just a few days. That would work for a few years. Mr. Crawford adding that it's a, quote, arrogant attitude to take to say that the U.S. defaulting on our debt for the first time in history would be any sort of economic big deal. Republican Congressman Tim Walberg of Michigan, apparently in agreement, he told the Washington Post that it is time to, quote, hold the line, by which he means we should default. Just go for it. Republican Alan West of Florida says President Obama is fear-mongering on the debt ceiling, that it is really nothing to be afraid of. And those Republican members of Congress are not alone on this.
This is a misnomer that I believe that the president and the Treasury Secretary have been trying to pass off on the American people. And it's this, that if Congress fails to raise the debt ceiling by $2.5 trillion, that somehow the United States will go into default and we will lose the full faith and credit of the United States. That is simply not true.
You would think that a responsible leader in this country would make sure that we encouraged bondholders, that we encouraged people who held our debt. You don't have to worry about anything. The only thing you guys have to fear is fear itself, because we're going to stand good for it.
Sure, we're going to default, but we're going to stand good for it, whatever that means. Everybody should feel better. All of the Beltway Gang of Six excitement today about this plan in the Senate is proceeding as if Congress all understands that there is a reason to act and act quickly, that the country will start to default on its debt and shut down on August 2nd, that the August 2nd deadline is real and it is bearing down on us. That is the assumption with all this excitement about the Gang of Six thing today. But frankly, you cannot take that for granted today. You cannot take it for granted that Congress, in fact, understands this. Over in the House, you want to know what they think the August 2nd deadline is? Do you want to know where they suspect this whole August 2nd deadline thing might have come from? Here's where they think it came from.
I can't help and be a little cynical here because, you know, we find out the president has a big birthday bash scheduled for August the 3rd, celebrities flying in from all over, and lo and behold, August 2nd is the deadline for getting something done so that he can have this massive, maybe the biggest fundraising dinner in history for a birthday celebration.
See, the president made up this fake deadline of August 2nd and put it on the calendar for his birthday to please celebrities who would be coming to his birthday party. The problem we have here now, as Ronald Reagan might say, is the problem of irresistible force about to meet an immovable object. The irresistible force is it's the crazy. It's the voices in the heads of Republicans in the House telling them, default? That sounds like defund. Woo, let's do it. It's the let's burn the whole thing down chaos conference. It's the denialist conspiracy theory nonsense among House Republicans, even among House Republicans who are running for president. That means that they are not going to vote to raise the debt ceiling no matter what the deal is. It's that irresistible force meeting the immovable object of the actual debt ceiling. That is a real deadline that is upon us.
We're in the 11th hour, and we don't have a lot more time left. We don't have any more time to engage in symbolic gestures. We don't have any more time to posture. It's time to get down to the business of actually solving this problem.
President Obama also said today, and I think this was a very important point, actually. He said that so far, throughout these negotiations, we have essentially been given a pass by the financial markets. But he said that could fall apart really quickly when it does start to fall apart. And that's what we are coming up on now. Listen to the president make that case here.
So far, at least, the markets have shown confidence that leadership here in Washington are not going to send the economy over a cliff. But if we continue to go through a lot of political posturing, if both sides continue to be dug in, if we don't have a basic spirit of cooperation that allows us to rise above immediate election year politics and actually solve problems, then I think markets here, the American people, and the international community are going to start reacting adversely fairly quickly.
What the president said there is true, and he believes it. And time is short, and the river's rising. And when the markets recognize that this is going to turn, and it's going to turn quickly and badly against the United States of America in a relatively irreversible way, then what do you do with a problem like John Boehner? Last night on this show, John Stanton, political reporter at Roll Call, said that the number of Republicans in the House who've decided it does not matter if we default, the number of denialists that this is any sort of a big deal, is rising now. That House Republicans laughed a Republican economist out of a meeting with them recently when he said default would in fact be a bad thing. We are now really facing catastrophe without raising this debt ceiling, and House Republicans seem to be getting less likely to do it, not more likely, no matter what sort of happy talk is happening in the other half of Washington over in the Senate. So what happens now? President Obama has to be thinking what President Clinton rather forcibly put into words today. Quote, former President Clinton says that he would invoke the so-called constitutional option to raise the nation's debt ceiling, quote, without hesitation and force the courts to stop me in order to prevent a default should Congress and the president fail to achieve agreement before the August 2nd deadline. Reported by Joe Conason today at National Memo. Happy talk coming out of Washington and gangs of senators all getting along with the president now is nice. It is, in fact, happy talk. But being realistic about this means getting real about the craziness in Washington right now, too, the denialists. Faced with that, can the president lift the debt ceiling on his own if that's what it will take to save the country from economic irreversible catastrophe?